Has this ever happened to you? You just finished a game, but you still want to play a bit more of it. And then a menu pops up and offers you a new game plus. You take it, and after a few minutes or hours, you get bored of it and drop the game and move on. If that happened to you, you might have encountered a bad new game plus. What is a bad new game plus, you might ask? Well, we need to start with what is a new game plus. How are they achieving their goals of a new game plus? And what makes a bad new game plus bad? New Game Plus, as the name suggests, is a game in which you start a new game, but you don't start a fresh new save. Instead, it has some additions to the experience. For example, you might keep your levels, skills, or items from the previous playthrough, and enemies might change, whether it be strength, location, or the amount of enemies. Goals. The main goal of a New Game Plus is to make the players want to replay the game. So how do they do that? 1. Multiple endings. Some games have multiple endings to encourage you to complete the game multiple times to see all of them. 2. Increase in challenge. Some games unlock a new difficulty for completing the game. They buff enemy encounters by increasing the enemy attack and defense, give them new movesets, and sometimes change the encounter by switching the enemy locations. For example, adding a tough enemy from a later part of the game to the start of the game. 3. Some games give new cosmetics for beating the game with some conditions, like not taking damage or dying, completing the game on a certain difficulty level, using or not using specific items, or doing specific endings. Bad. When does the New Game Plus experience becomes bad? When it implements one of its goals poorly and with the least amount of changes. But why would they do that? They want people to replay their games, but they don't want to spend development time and resources to make the experience worthwhile. For example, 1. Games that are linear the entire game and just have a different ending depending on the final choice ruin the experience of a second playthrough. Since it's the same game with the same cutscenes, sometimes they are not skippable, but the choice at the end is the only thing that changes. They aren't worth the time invested, or even worse, when the true ending requires you to get all other endings before you beat the game for the last time, which can result in you beating the same game 3 or more times in a row. 2. In order to play on a hard difficulty, you have to beat the game on quote-unquote normal difficulty. This creates frustration by making you play a game that's not challenging enough for you, just so you would be allowed to play on a preferred difficulty. And usually the increase in difficulty is implemented in the worst way, which is just a small tweak to the stats on the enemies to make them hit harder and take less damage. 3. Costumes that you unlock after beating the game, regardless if they provide any benefit, aren't enough to incentivize players to replay the entire game just to see the costume in action. Does this mean if a game has any of these bad elements in them, they should be considered having bad New Game Plus? Not necessarily. These are just the signs to look out for since it's the easiest parts to ruin. Sometimes a game can have them and still make a great experience. For example, in the Devil May Cry series, in order to play on a harder difficulty, you need to beat the game multiple times. They do that to teach you how the normal enemies and bosses work on a basic level, on the normal difficulties, and allow you time to unlock new movesets and weapons slowly to get used to them, before you challenge the higher difficulties, which are implemented great, since they add new moves to enemies, change locations of enemies, and really try to challenge the player. But it would be too hard to do it on your first playthrough. Another example, in Nioh 2, the story doesn't change at all after starting a New Game Plus. No new paths or bosses, no new NPCs or dialogues, but they change the game in a different way. The game starts as a Souls-like. The first time you play, you try to dodge and block attacks and punish enemies when they miss or if you outreach them. But from the second playthrough onward, it transforms the game into a looter game. They give you better loot and set bonuses that change the game style completely. So now, you kill enemies and bosses way faster, and you try to race to the end of the game to progress to the next New Game Plus to get even better gear. And by that point, you're playing a completely different game. With these two examples, you can see that good New Game Pluses are built from the ground up. and their purpose is to build on the game or to give it a nice bonus after completing it if you want to play more, which is a shame that most games that have New Game Plus do the bare minimum, since it either takes developers from polishing the game or ruin the original experience, since after you are done with the New Game Plus, you are left with a sour taste in your mouth.